passion has always been on how solutions from any other part of the world can become common solutions to the challenges that we face. And I think from that introduction, it will usually take me down to the kind of discussion that we need to have today, the kind of economic policies that are needed to address the challenges that the world faces. But I want to start off 2 years ago. What happened? What happened 2 years ago? Just put, yes. Yes, excellent. You agree? And so when the pandemic started.
Well, Richard, the smart board's not working right now, unfortunately.
Oh, they're not working.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want a chalkboard?
Yes, I like
Yeah.
to. I like to jot down things.
Yeah.
But when the pandemic happened, it affected the entire world. So when it affected the entire world, what did countries do? What did Canada do? What did Canada do?
Lockdown.
Excellent. Then after the lockdown, what happened? What happened? There were stimulus packages, and Canada actually put in place over $100 billion Canadian stimulus packages that actually supported people, because a lot of people were laid off, people lose their job, and people started working from home. And as we're speaking today, over 800,000 Canadians lost their job during that time. At that particular moment, it was the same thing that was happening in Africa. Africa lost over 50% of the jobs. But unfortunately, the stimulus packages that the United States, that Europe, that Canada put in place to jumpstart the economy, to actually prevent people from being laid off, did not happen in other countries in the continent. Why I'm bringing this in is to make you to understand that there are global challenges that affect countries, but do not affect countries the same way, based on the economic fundamentals of those countries. And then the second aspect is climate change. Have you heard of climate change? So what do you think climate change, so which impacts of climate change have you easily seen? Please put up your hand. Have you easily seen? So I'm talking now of global calamities. Calamities here. So now, climate change. So what do you understand by climate change in the first place? You've heard of climate change in the news. You've seen, yes?
Just the earth is getting overall very hot.
Correct. It's getting very hot. Then we are seeing flooding, we are seeing hurricanes, we are seeing cyclones, we are seeing droughts, we are seeing heat waves. I think last summer in Canada, I think it was in British Columbia.
Yeah.
Actually, the temperatures were at levels never ever seen before. As we're speaking today, we are seeing floods in Europe, we are seeing floods in China, we are seeing droughts in Africa, and also floods in other parts of the world. As a result of that, especially with the changing climate, we are actually at 1.1 degree today. And we are projected as a global community to go up to 2.7 degrees. That then means we'll see more droughts, more floods, more hurricanes, more cyclones. And what are going to be the impacts of these? These will impact on the economies of countries. From the food we eat, where there will be droughts that countries will not be able to grow food, especially in Africa. When, as we're speaking today, Africa have 257 million people that go to bed every night hungry. That then means that actually, as we're speaking today, with the changing climate, there will be less food and those numbers will increase. And then from climate change, now we go to global crisis. Global crisis, which we have already talked about, the pandemic. Then we're also talking about war. So if you look at the Ukraine-Russian war at the moment, it's resulted to inflation in the global community. Why? First of all, importation of wheat. Africa imports wheat from Ukraine and Russia worth $15 billion a year. As we are speaking now, food prices have gone up because the importation of that wheat has actually reduced. And so the available wheat costs now have gone up. And the effect is not only being felt in Africa, it's felt in Canada, in America, and in Europe and other parts of the world. So I am trying to drive you down to the point in which then I can zero down on Africa, but from the perspective that challenges of the global community affect countries but do not affect them the same. based on their economic fundamentals. Yes?
Yeah, so, and I'm just gonna jump in, this is what we kind of talked to do. So it was 2 nights ago, just sitting there, waiting for some stuff at your place there, and I was just sitting watching the news, and I was horrified because they were actually talking about, you know, so we here in Canada, we're seeing this inflation, we're seeing the food shortage and the crisis and the impact on Ukraine, and this one CEO, and he went on and he basically said, and it scared me, he said, you know, we'll be fine. Okay, here in Canada and the United States, they'll be fine, you know, because we have these policies in place. I'm going to flush it a little more out with Richard. But he did say that, you know, there are vulnerable places in the world, okay, like Africa, who are going to suffer. And we're just starting to see the beginning of it, okay? And this is where we've been kind of talking about the kind of the supply chain and distribution and the I guess the unequal distribution. Sorry, Richard, go on.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Rob, for bringing in that dimension. And so when you look at all these challenges today, the world is so interconnected that what happens in any part of the world will have impact. But when you put Africa in the mix of all these equations, Africa is a continent, as we currently speak today, of about 1.4 billion citizens. Out of these 1.4 billion citizens, 60% of the population are youthful. Between the ages of 13 to 25, they are 60% of the entire population. And out of this population of 1.4 billion citizens, 257 million of them are food insecure. 600 million of them are energy impoverished. But at the same time, Africa offers the biggest opportunity that needs to be tapped, and that can be unleashed through economic policies that can then be able to drive entrepreneurship and also enterprises that can then be able to ensure that people can put more money in their pockets. That means drive socio-economic opportunities. And the reason why I was given all these aspects was to show that when you look at calamities that happen across the world, whether it is emergencies like pandemic or climate change that is already with us, or emergencies like wars that we have seen already affecting this, when it comes down to Africa, we need to understand 3 aspects. The first is that the economic policies that do exist in the continent today, whether we are talking about economic policy vis-a-vis the environmental lens, Africa is actually having a lot of policies, climate change policies. 52 of the countries, because there are 54 African countries, 52 of the countries have ratified the climate policy. Canada also have a law in place called the Low Emissions Net Zero Accountability Act that they have put in place to reduce emissions by 45% in the next 8 years. Africa have also put those in place. The difference is that the implementation of the act is already happening in Canada. In Africa, most of the countries have started, but they are not moving at a faster rate. So from the policy perspective, the policies do exist, but the difference is that those policies are not implemented at a faster rate. So if we were to go down to food security, for example, I have said 257 million citizens go to bed hungry. But the continent do have 65% of uncultivated arable land. That then means that if you were to formulate an economic policy, the first will be to add value to what is produced from that land. Because Africa is losing food, worth $48 billion US. Why? Because there's no value addition. So when you see, for example, maize or wheat or cassava, which is a staple food that is used there, when it is harvested, it gets spoiled. Why? Because there are no storage facility, there are no industries mostly to add value to that food, or to turn the wheat into wheat flour, or to turn the maize and then export it. And so most of the materials that are being exported are exported raw. When you export raw material, then you are losing employment opportunities, especially for the young people, whom I said are 60%. So one of the policies should be geared towards adding value to what is produced in the continent. Yes.
So I just want to stop here. Just hold on. So we talked about this. So remember that system at the very beginning, okay? That mercantilist system. I think it was one of the first kind of notes we took, and this goes all the way back to colonial times, okay? And in which, and all the colonies, okay, this mercantilist system, you've got the European colonial powers, okay? And they would take over all of these different colonies, and all they would want is the resources, the natural resources, from these areas, take them back to their country, okay, and then manufacture them and do what they want to distribute. So Africa is still plagued by that economic system, okay, and so are certain other colonies. So it's something that we have talked about in the class.
Excellent. Thanks again, Rob, for that clarification. And now, I will now bring this to the minerals dimension, because Rob has, actually Africa, all the minerals of the world are found in the African continent. Whether you're talking about chromium, you're talking about gold, you're talking about lithium, you're talking about graphite. And why I'm mentioning these specific minerals are because they are related to the changing climate solutions. I mentioned Canada, and I'll keep using the example of Canada. Canada actually is among the 10 highest emitters of countries in the world to the greenhouse gas. That's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But at the same time, Canada have actually pledged to lower their emissions by 45% in the next 80 years and move to what is called a net zero by 2050. And what Canada has done is that instead of focusing on the oil and gas, they are going to reduce their emission by moving towards clean energy sources. This will need renewables, like wind, like solar panels. The materials that are needed to make solar panels need minerals, lithium, cobalt, graphite, and most of these materials are actually found in Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo harbors most of these minerals. But when these minerals are exploited, the capacity and the ability to add value to process is not really there. And so they're exported in raw form. When you export, you are actually exporting employment and importing unemployment. And that then means that the best economic policy is also about partnerships, especially with developed countries, for example, like Canada, that can set up manufacturing and processing industries that build the capacity of the citizens to be able to add value, so that in the course of adding that value to those minerals, you are creating employment and jobs for the communities and for the country and for the society. That currently is not there. So one of the best economic policy is one that is premised on partnerships, especially to get expertise to build and develop capacity of the community, so that at least they can be able to add value to what is produced. And I brought up these specific areas of minerals because the world moving towards a climate resilient development pathway, with Canada as an example that I'm giving, needs to depend also on these minerals. But to depend on the minerals in developing these solar panels that are going to actually drive cleaner electricity, those minerals will be coming from Africa. But part of the best opportunity will be to ensure that the communities that can also be able to add value to these minerals rather than exporting them in raw form. And that takes me now to the next aspect, which is very, very important. Because if you look at education policy and economic policy need to be synchronized. Because if you do not train people with the requisite skills that are needed, no matter which economic policy you put in place, you will not have the human resource. You will not have what I call the sovereign capital, which is the ability of people to provide the skills that are needed to then be able to do what is needed. And so the best economic policy is actually investing in education, putting more money in education, but in education in such a way that what is being taught is aligned to the challenges that are being faced in the continent. I'll talk about value addition. Value addition needs skills, because value addition in minerals, value addition in food products, to turn food into finished products so that at least it can be exported in a finished format. That will fetch more money for the country, for the region. But when you export without adding value, then you are losing money. But you need a skill set. So skills retooling needs to become part and parcel of the education policy, which is directly linked to economic policy, because if you are developing your economic policy, education and capacity development needs to be part and parcel of that. At the moment, actually the educational system needs to factor in all these aspects, but to factor that it needs funding. So one of the best economic policy is actually to integrate educational policy. as one of the aspects that can then be able to enhance skills. And now that takes me now to the aspect from the educational policy. We now need to look at, yes, when people are trained, they come out with degrees, they come out with diplomas, they need to then be able to apply the skills that they have acquired to education. That then means the physical policy side needs to be very, very effective and vibrant. When you look at the physical policy side that is supposed to be effective and vibrant, it's mostly absent in most of the countries. But when you look at young people who are coming out of university with degrees, most of the time they do not have the liquid cash to be able to assess, or the tax incentives to be able to be given to start their businesses. And so to jumpstart businesses, especially tapping into these young people's skills, there is need for a fiscal policy incentive that can then be able to be given to the young people who can then be able to create their own businesses, create their own enterprises, but do so in the areas of competitive advantage of the countries in the continent, which is, as I said earlier, adding value to what is produced. Because the continent has 65% of cultivated arable land, it's losing for the 8 billion because of lack of value addition in agricultural produce, and it has a food market, as we speak today, of 150 billion US dollars. I think I'll stop here and then take some questions from you guys. Please feel free to ask any questions. But are you understanding what I'm saying? And are you enjoying it? Excellent. Please feel free to ask any question.
Yeah, sorry, I will start. Okay, so can we just go back to that? So when you're saying education, like specifically, I guess, what countries are doing better in regards to education, and what are they doing specifically in regards to education?
I think if you look at the continent of Africa, is set up in two parts, based from the, well, actually three, because we have the French education system and we have the English education system, and some countries that were colonized by the Portuguese, and like Mozambique,
Yes.
and some by the Spanish, like Equatorial Guinea,
Yeah.
and Guinea-Bissau in the western part. But overarchingly, what I could say is all the countries are doing well, and all of them are not really doing well. Why do I say so? Let me start from where I said all the countries are doing well. If you look at the education, the preliminary education that is actually being taught, I mean, it's pretty much very basic and universal, even benchmarked with global standards, right up to the university level. What makes the difference is that most of the educational curriculum or curricula is not really tailored to the challenges that Africa faces. Like I've mentioned, if you have a continent with 257 million people who do not have access to food, not because there's no food that is given, just because value is not added. If education is geared towards training people and giving them the requisite skills to set up and develop their capacity to do that, then that becomes quite very, very instrumental. But that is a gap. So what I would say is, first of all, the basics that are universal are taught in all the countries. But making education to be tailor-made within the structure of addressing the immediate challenges that the continent faces, I think there is a deficiency there. And this happens, and there's really no country that I can say that is ahead of the other. But the beauty is that when we study in other universities, like I study out of my master's and my doctorate degree in the University of Nottingham, then you start to see that tailoring education is very, very important. So most of the work that we do is also using applied education that is not only taught in the classroom. Because there is the indigenous knowledge aspect, where there are people who have never gone to school, but they have coped with climate change. They have actually produced ways in which that are not documented, which now need to start getting documented. Let me just give a very practical example. A mother in a local community